Good afternoon. Welcome everybody as we wait for our 5:30 thought this Thursday. I hope your day has gone well, whatever you have been doing. We'll be continuing to look at words from the Bible, and I see that it is 5:30, so a very warm welcome everybody to our Thursday evening streaming from St Michael at the Northgate Church in Oxford. We do continue to look at words from the Bible, and especially maybe any phrases that would have struck early listeners, would have made them startle and think, oh, this is particularly interesting or challenging or amusing or whatever it may be. You may have seen that the title for this evening, the subtitle is, I think, something like, "And even from a fish," even from a fish. And you may have guessed that we're going to look at the story of Jonah and the whale in the Old Testament. And there's one line here. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. From inside the fish, even from inside the fish, he could pray. Now, that's the first time in the story that Jonah has talked to God. God has talked to Jonah. He's sent him, commissioned him to go and preach to Nineveh, the great city, a great honor. Jonah doesn't want to do that and runs away. And as we may know, there's then, as he catches a boat, there's a storm. The sailors say, "What's going on?" Jonah says, "Actually, I think it's possibly me because I've disobeyed my calling." They get nervous, they throw him over. Just note the honesty of Jonah, that he admits, yeah, no, I think it's me that's messed up here. And that honesty in knowing maybe we've gone the wrong way. Anyway, he's thrown over, and then the big fish, or the whale is told in some versions, swallows him up. And then Jonah is in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. We may instantly be thinking, if we had been reading this story in the New Testament times, and the 3 days and 3 nights, and Christ, and on the third day rising again, etc. Number 3, often significant in these ancient stories. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. Sometimes things just feel so desperate. It's pretty desperate to be swallowed by a fish. Sometimes things feel so desperate. And how do we react? And interestingly, Jonah still prays. He could have just simply gone into total despair, or total self-pity, or total self-justification, whatever it may be. But Jonah prays. And there's no place so low from which we cannot pray, that we cannot call out to God. And in his prayer, in the story, "In my distress I called to the Lord," and so he goes through the story. There are 1 or 2 quite amusing moments. Imagine that we're children around the campfire hearing this, and when the storyteller says, "Seaweed was wrapped around my head," everybody would think, oh, he must have looked a bit strange with that seaweed wrapped around his head, and so on. But he also talks about hope. "Yet I will look again towards your holy temple. Yet I will look again to your holy temple," even in despair in the middle of the fish. So not quite in despair, because he was still praying. He could still find hope. A really difficult situation. He was looking to the future. "When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you." He is released from the fish. The end of chapter 2, the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. "Go to the great city of Nineveh." And interesting there, God doesn't say, well, we know that you found the idea of Nineveh a bit tough. Let's try something a bit simpler this time. God says, this was the calling. We're going to have another go. Just occasionally for us, we may feel that we've perhaps missed a calling, or even disobeyed a calling. And God is the God of second chances. And God will say, let's have another go. If that's still right in God's plans, then he will give us that next opportunity. "Go to the great city of Nineveh, proclaim to it the message I give you." And so Jonah goes. Nineveh was a very large city, took 3 days to go through it, and he proclaimed 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. So he's talking about the results of lots of sinful behavior. And the Ninevites believed God. And when Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, He rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in the dust. Just occasionally, there may be people in our lives or in the wider world who we think never in a million years will turn to God. And here, perhaps Jonah might have thought that about the king of Nineveh, yet he does. He hears this message and he responds, takes off the royal robes, etc. Perhaps that's a moment of hope for us as we think of those who, as I say, maybe feel or seem to be a long way from the things of Christ. Let's remember the king of Nineveh responding positively. Who knows what God may do? Who knows what are the secrets in people's hearts? So the king of Nineveh and the people repent. It's all gone very well. And then the start of chapter 4, but to Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. Now, some narrators would have just finished the story when it was all going so well. Nineveh had repented. Jonah had got out of the whale. He then performed his calling well. All was looking good. But the narrator goes on for the last chapter of the story, in which Jonah is very grumpy. And basically his argument was, God, you didn't need me to do this. You are full of compassion. You would have done this anyway. Always good to remember that God, full of compassion, but he does use us. We have a role to play. And in some way beyond his understanding, Jonah was part of God rescuing that city. Likewise for us, in some way beyond our understanding, we are, and we say it reverently, we are needed in the purposes of God. Jonah is a bit cross. He knows that God is full of compassion. He then makes himself a shelter, sits in the shade, and then a plant is given to him to give him more shade. But then the next day, the plant goes, and Jonah continues to be angry about that as well. I'm so angry, I wish I were dead. And God quite gently, but relatively firmly says, you can't control the plant that's growing up over you, whether it's there or not. Likewise, you are a player in the great stage of life. You're not in control. And so in my compassion, if I need you to go to Nineveh, that's important. It's not for you to tell me how I should work as God. Should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, says God, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? And really, God is saying to Jonah, stop being grumpy, and let's just see what we can do together. And remember, I am a compassionate God. From even the fish, Jonah prays even from the fish. And wherever we are feeling particularly low, let's remember that Jonah could pray from there, and so can we. If ever we're not sure if we've missed a calling from God, or if we know jolly well that we've run away, as Jonah did, let's remember that God gave him. Let's rejoice in that. Jonah was a little bit needy, as we all are, a little bit grumpy, as perhaps sometimes we all are, but God used him. He's a pivotal figure in the story. So next time we hear the story of Jonah and the whale mentioned, it's one of those stories in the Old Testament which is really stuck in people's minds. Let's remember that the first words that Jonah says to God are from the belly of a fish, and that was okay. We can turn to God from anywhere. Thank you so much for listening. Tomorrow evening, 5:30, Celtic Spirituality Reflection, and as you may have seen in the title, a little thought about a hazelnut and a wonderful lady who gained great spiritual truths from that. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Have a blessed evening.